It really is about understanding who am I. When you ask for feedback, are you only asking your best friends for feedback, or are you asking everybody else around you? If somebody is in a hole and you jump into that hole because they're really upset, that's sympathy. Empathy is saying, okay, I see that you're upset. Let me look around, see how I can help you. I'm finding a stick maybe to pull that person up. That's empathy. This is where politicians get it wrong. Politicians try to be popular, but they don't necessarily put the work in to build trust. If we are going to surround ourselves and allow ourselves to be surrounded by these people who are sucking our life energy out of us, then I have learned over time to either let them go or to distance myself so they have minimal impact on me.
My guest today is all about mastering the art of inner leadership. During his 32 years within the UK Police Service, he spent over 2 decades in leadership roles. Having risen to the top levels of leadership, he's since led thousands of people and managed multi-million-pound budgets, as well as strategically commanding the most challenging of critical operational scenarios. Through his unique immersion coaching, he takes you on a journey of deep self-realization before arriving at a roadmap to fulfill your own individual goals. In his popular book, Smash the Habit, he shows us how to transform our lives by overcoming negative habits of the body and mind. He's been a contributor to several well-known magazines, sharing his views on leadership. Kul Mahay is a motivational speaker, executive coach, and mentor, and he trains an international base of clients that includes CEOs, leaders, and organizations. In this conversation, among the things we'll dive deep into are what it takes to unleash the leader in you, and how to transform our most impossible habits. Namaste.
Namaste.
Welcome. And we've just had an absolutely fabulous conversation for my YouTube channel, for the Self-Discovery channel. And now I'd like you to share some of the things that we earlier talked about and expand on a couple of them. Okay. First of all, let's begin with a little bit of an introduction to yourself.
Okay. So my name is Kul Mahay. I spent 32 years in the police service.
In the UK?
In the UK. And for the last 10 years, I've dedicated my life towards helping organizations to become much more human-centric and to understand the power of emotional intelligence, which I think is much more encompassing than people realize it is. It's in every facet of our lives.
Beautiful. So what's important to know is that Kul joined the UK police force when he was only 16. And then he was there for over 30 years, and 2/3 of that time he spent in leadership roles. And so that's kind of given him a good insight into how it looks to lead from the inside out.
Yeah.
And you have a program called Ignite Your Inner Potential.
Yes.
Which is, I think, speaks for itself. And
yeah, I mean, we launched Ignite in 2017. The idea was that I wanted to do something that was public facing, that was going to create a ripple effect of positivity. So I remember I went to a Tony Robbins program. I came away from that highly energized, but also thinking, well, why can't we do something similar in the UK? So we started with just 70 people in the room. We had our last one in 2020. We had 350 people in the room, hoping that it was going to grow. But then, of course, COVID hit us. But we're now bringing it back in January, so I can't wait.
Fantastic.
The idea is for people to, in that one day, to go really deep into their own psyche, their own understanding, their self-awareness, to really find out what their true potential is.
Beautiful. And you also have this podcast called Human-Centered Leadership. And you have a program, probably multiple programs that stem off of the human-centered leadership sort of principles. When we were talking earlier, you mentioned 26 principles that you like to hone in on when it comes to talking about emotional intelligence and the 4 quadrants that go within emotional intelligence. So starting from the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence, because that's kind of like my passion amongst similar related areas, I would like you then to drill down into those 26 areas, but, bearing in mind that we have a very general audience. We're not a corporate audience here.
Yeah. Okay, so I won't be able to drill into all 26. I can't remember all 26, I'll be very honest. But I see emotional intelligence as a bit of a pyramid. So you have the title that most people understand, emotional intelligence. It's become quite well understood now. Not everyone defines it in the right way or in the same way. So emotional intelligence, for whatever that means to anybody.
What does it mean, actually?
Well, for me, what it means is emotional intelligence means having an understanding, a deep understanding of how your emotions affect your behaviors, and then understanding how other people's emotions affect their behaviors, and then understanding how our behavior affects other people's behaviors and emotions, and therefore fundamentally how we impact on the wider world.
And how other people's behavior impacts us.
100%.
Right. So the 4 quadrants, can you run us through those?
So the 4 quadrants are very simple. They were, there used to be 5 quadrants, but 2 have been molded into one. But they really started with Daniel Goleman back in the 1990s, who I think is like the godfather of emotional intelligence. And, many people can find out from YouTube around Daniel Goleman. He's got some great stuff on YouTube. But in essence, you've got self-awareness. Now, self-awareness, I think, is the start of any journey in leadership. It really is about understanding who am I? And within that, we have 3 key competencies. One is, how accurately do you actually measure yourself? When you're looking at yourself in the mirror, how accurate is that?
Yeah.
Do we really look at ourselves in the mirror? Or do we only look at the parts that we want to look at? When you ask for feedback, how accurate is the feedback? Are you only asking your best friends for feedback? Or are you asking everybody else around you? Some people might not say the right things. And then
do they dare to tell you?
or they dare to, that's an important part, because do you create an environment where people feel brave enough to tell you the full truth?
Yes.
And then there's another aspect to that, and that is around your personal power. And what I mean by that is what is the quality of the language that you have with yourself, the conversation that you have having with yourself? Is your self-esteem good? Is your confidence good? Or are you beating yourself up and bullying yourself all the time and telling yourself that you can't achieve something? So those are the 3 principles that sit under the whole idea of self-awareness. Once you've become self-aware, once you know yourself at a much deeper level, then it really is about, okay, so I recognize there are some behaviors that I need to change. So then you go into self-management. And self-management is really the hard part. When you've got a habit that you don't particularly, is not particularly good, and you need to change it, and you have to go through that really difficult part to change your life and do things differently. That's self-management. And this is where a lot of people trip up because they can't sustain it. So for example, in 20 years ago to this year, I was a heavy smoker. I was a heavy drinker. I was a senior detective. And one thing that senior detectives did was drink. I was in the Sunday Times wine club. I was a whiskey connoisseur. I was having pints of beer every night.
And you're sick?
And yeah, absolutely. Going against everything that's in my religion and so I was doing all of that, and I was a big meat eater. And this awareness suddenly came to me that I was doing everything wrong. So overnight, I stopped drinking, I stopped eating meat, stopped smoking, all on the same day. And I felt that discomfort for maybe 6 months, but I worked through that discomfort, and now I don't even think about it. So it's that self-management. And in self-management, you may have some principles, some competencies that are all measurable, by the way, around what's your likelihood of taking action on something. And we can actually measure that. What's your initiative like to even think about taking that action? What's your levels of creativity like in terms of understanding what kind of actions are possible for you? And then you go on to the external factors. So once you've fixed yourself, because everything starts with you, doesn't it? Then it's about the outer world. So now you know yourself. How good are you at knowing other people, reading the room and reading other people's emotions? So that the principles that sit underneath that is something like situational awareness. How aware are you when you get into situations? When you walk into an environment, can you really read what's going on? Do you make clumsy mistakes and say the wrong thing in the wrong place? Do you say and do things that upset other people? You have no idea why that's happening. That's a lack of situational awareness. And also, how do you build rapport? Do you build connection with people? Are you good at that? Do you have empathy? Do you see things from a different perspective? Or do you just have a singular way of seeing things? Or do you disguise empathy as sympathy? So, and there's always this definition about the two. And the way I see sympathy and empathy is just by using this analogy. If somebody is in a hole and you jump into that hole because they're really upset, that's sympathy, right? Because now you're both stuck. Yeah. Empathy is saying, okay, I see that you're upset. Let me look around, see how I can help you. and finding a stick maybe to pull that person up. That's empathy. So what is it for you? Are you a sympathetic person or are you an empathetic person? And then finally, when you've got all of that, fundamentally, what is emotional intelligence all about? It's about building relationships. So it's just some of the competencies that sit underneath that is how good are you at building trust. I think trust is foundational. Trust is foundational in a romantic relationship. Trust is foundational in a corporate relationship with your staff. Trust, if you can achieve trust in any kind of relationship.
Even if they don't like you, but they trust you.
They trust you.
They know that when push comes to shove,
100%.
you're going to do the
They
right
don't
thing.
have to like you, but if they trust you, this is where politicians get it wrong. Politicians try to be popular, but they don't necessarily put the work in to build trust. And if politicians did the hard work around building trust, they would have so much more success. So it's that. How do you create a sense of belonging? How do you build rapport? How do you read other people's sort of language so that you can mirror their language? All of these kind of things. So all of those competencies are really designed to measure your levels of emotional intelligence and find out which one of these competencies might be pulling the whole overall emotional intelligence down. And that's what we do with a lot of our programs when it comes to human-centered leadership. So that's what we do in the corporate arena. But emotional intelligence is really about human beings, full stop. So I try to practice this wherever I go with whoever I am.
What do you think it is that actually keeps people the most, trips people up the most, I would say, in terms of personal behavior?
A good question. I think what trips people up the most is, can I say two?
Yeah, of course.
Because I'm spoiled for choice, really. One is, I think, this whole idea of limbic thinking, where we allow our emotions to make most of our decisions. And if we're happy, we'll make happy decisions. If we're angry, frustrated, sad, depressed, we make similar, lesser quality decisions based on those negative emotions. But we don't realize we're doing it. And that for me is really, really sad. But one thing that we can all do something about, it's about learning to take that mental step back in our own head and making rational decisions. What is the right decision to make in these circumstances? Not what do I feel is the right decision. There's a subtle difference between the two. And the other big thing, I think, is not really taking time out to understand the environment in which we're operating right now. Every room that we walk into, every environment that we walk into, every relationship that we walk into, every conversation is different.
And
Understand.
Even from one day to the next.
And one day to the next. So you could be talking to your husband, to your wife, in one situation on one day, doesn't mean that you're going to behave exactly the same way, or you should behave exactly the same way the next day, because the environment might have shifted around you. When you get as really good at reading your environment, honestly,
what are we reading? What are we looking for?
You're looking for all sorts. I mean, even down to picking up the energy levels within the room.
Gut feel.
The gut feel, the gut intuition. Never underestimate that sixth sense that we all have. But looking for behavioral responses, what facial expressions, what micro expressions might be displayed behind the words that are being used. So the words might be, and if there's any men listening, dangerous word coming from my wife sometimes is fine. Are you okay? I'm fine. What are the facial expressions behind that word? And you can yes, exactly.
I'm fine.
But you can pick up facial expressions and then, read those facial expressions in to whatever response you're going to give. It's that.
Rather than just walking in blindly and whether they like it or not, I'm just going to be myself. I'm just going to be myself. I don't care.
Getting so settled into a relationship where you just feel that I can just do this.
Yeah, but it happens a lot. I feel this is rhetoric going around the planet, I feel right now, especially social media, where there is a lot of content that comes out where people are saying things like, I have to take care of my feelings and my needs, regardless of whatever it makes somebody else feel. It's almost a compensation for a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-respect, a lack of self-worth. And then we kind of go to the opposite direction by picking that up sort of almost exclusively. to everything else. And that's not emotional intelligence. That's the opposite to emotional
So
intelligence.
this is pendulous thinking, right? So you're going from one extreme right over to the other extreme. So the real challenge is finding that happy balance in the middle where you are aware and you are looking after your own sense of well-being and the conversation inside your head. That's very important. But you cannot be doing that at the loss of doing it externally to yourself as well. Both have to go in parallel. So we have to be monitoring ourselves and making sure that we're in a good mental state and healthy state to be in. But we also need to make sure that we're in, the people outside of us are also in that state. If we are, connecting with those people, that's human centric for me.
Where do you stand in the emotional intelligence spectrum when it comes to relationships? How much effort do you give to a relationship? At what point do you realize that, this is kind of like a lost leader, need to move on? How do you work with that in emotional intelligence?
That's a tough one. I mean, every relationship is different, but you're right. You have to, emotional intelligence is not about being soft. It isn't. It's just about being aware of yourself and of other people. That's what emotional intelligence is about. And we do have relationships around us that suck our life energy from us, don't we? We have those people around us that no matter when we talk to them, they will always be in a negative state or in an angry state or something else. Yesterday, I went to a university. I was doing some coaching with a few leaders at this university. So I went to the reception area in this huge building, and between each coaching client, I came back to the reception area. And there was a lovely lady. She was a lovely lady who was in the cafeteria, but I overheard a conversation with every single person, every single time I sat down, every single person she spoke to. And she said almost identical things. She said something like, "Oh, it's a tough day today. Yeah, they've let somebody else go. I'm by myself. Yeah, I don't know if I'll cope." But actually, all I saw her doing in between clients was sitting down on another table.
Spread misery.
Just sitting there doing nothing by herself. And I just thought to myself, not only are you going downward into a downward spiral, making yourself even more depressed, so by the time you're going home, you're going to feel awful, but you're actually infecting every single person that you come into contact with, which actually goes against everything your job should be about. So when I come across these kind of individuals, I might try once, twice, 3 times. But if I know that I'm not going to get into, be able to influence that individual, and they might be a really close person, they might even be a family member, then I have learned over time to either let them go or to distance myself so they have minimal impact on me. And it comes from a quote that I once read from a chap called Jim Rohn, and he said, "You become the average of the 5 people whose company you keep most." So if we are going to surround ourselves and allow ourselves to be surrounded by these people who are sucking our life energy out of us, then who on earth do we expect ourselves to become?
Yeah.
And we're all on this journey of growth, aren't we? And how can we possibly allow anyone to affect this journey of growth? Because if they're doing that, it's actually quite selfish of them.
Always comes back to walking the middle path in all these things, isn't it? I feel that part of emotional intelligence is to learn, if you're a giver, to really learn to know when what you're giving is almost too much, and when it's not being received. Because the value of giving, sometimes we do it because that's the right thing to do. But in a relationship where you're the one constantly reaching out, giving out, etc., and it's not being reciprocated, in those situations, how does that, what there is to learn? There must be something to learn, because we now have an imbalance. It's actually, in Sanskrit, the word for relationship is sambandh.
Okay.
Sambandh. Sam is equal. Same. Sam is equal. Bandh is bond. An equal bond. Now, to me, that word is never ever translated that way. It's never actually broken down that way. And I feel that it's a very important lesson that we get from Sanskrit in how relationships work.
Yeah.
There is a sambandh. And so there is it may not be 50-50. It may sometimes be more on one side and less on the other. And then
but
may
overall,
turn the other way. Yeah. And so when it's sort of one way, more or less, and there's a lot of expectation on one side, and to give. And I think at that point, what do you say is the lesson? The lesson would be to learn.
I mean, I've learned this lesson several times over, and I'm not saying that I've got it 100% and I'm perfect in it now, but I have learned that I was one of these people that was always giving of myself, and I still do. I give an awful lot to other people, but particularly in sort of family circumstances, I was always the one that was going out and doing things, going out and supporting people and driving my car just because, somebody in the family has got an issue over there. And then I realized it's not coming back to me either. And here's my sort of reasoning around this. The more I did of the giving, it actually took away my time to give to my immediate family, to my own loved ones, to my wife. So there were sacrifices that I was making to be able to give. And if that is not being reciprocated
or valued,
then don't forget you're creating damage over here to give over here where there is nothing coming back to you. So there's not even some energy that you're taking away from that you can say this was positive energy. Because at least if somebody said to you, I really appreciate what you're doing, or, people recognize it, at least there's something there. But when there's nothing there at all, then you realize that actually all you've been doing is digging a hole over here and actually filling an eternal hole over there.
It comes to the question, why do we do that? Why are we giving so much where it's not required or received or valued, taken for granted perhaps? Why do we do that?
I think it's because fundamentally human beings are social creatures, and we are designed to live in social groups. And as part of living in social groups, there is a give and take within that. And we see this in primates all the time. You cannot live in a social group, can you, without giving and taking and playing your full part. So I think that's what we're doing. For those people that do it, because not everybody does it.
No.
But for those of us who do it, I think what we're trying to do is play our full part, be a part of the team. And I think that's why I've done it.
Sometimes relationships evolve from a certain, have a certain life earlier on, and then that evolves, changes, and then perhaps we continue to behave the same ways. And then we need to shift that behavior because things have changed, people have changed. You've changed. Yeah.
And, there's an old saying, isn't there, that everybody comes into our life for a reason, a season, and a lifetime.
Yeah.
Now, whenever people come in and out of my life, I say to myself, well, maybe they were a season, a reason, or a lifetime. And that's it. And it just helps me sort of manage my own emotions in some of these relationship issues that I might come into contact with. But it happens less and less now. The more I have found myself, the more comfortable I have become with who I am, for all my sort of faults, the more confident I am with who I am and my values that drive me, the better I feel about these. When people step into my life or step out of my life, I just accept it for what it is.
Thank them for being there when they were.
Absolutely.
And the lessons we got from that.
Yeah, I silently
joy, the pleasure, whatever it was. Now, you have a book called Smash the Habit. And I want you to tell us about it's about smashing negative habits.
Yeah.
Do you remember the principles in the book?
Yeah, I mean, it was the book really came about because I stopped drinking. I was able to stop drinking 20 years ago, and on the same day I stopped smoking and stopped eating meat.
I have to let the audience know that when I say he's Sikh, that means that whole culture very much appreciates a whiskey or two.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, part of me stopping drinking, I did become a bit of an alien person in my own culture. A lot of people did look at me and think, my own brothers, I remember when I made the decision, I was in India.
Yeah.
And I remember my brothers had come to India with me for the first time. My dad was there. And I remember walking down the stairs and I said, I've just had this revelation and I've realized that I need to stop all of this. Now, I was the biggest drinker. I was the biggest meat eater. I was the biggest smoker. So they sort of laughed at me. And for the next 15 years, every time I visited them, my eldest brother would say something like, oh, I forgot you don't drink. I'm like, I've not drunk for 15 years. Why do you keep saying that? I think he's hoping that I'd maybe start again, right? So the book was really about that, but also about 9 years ago now, I decided I was going to stop drinking tea, coffee. I decided I was going to stop drinking fizzy pop, the sodas and Cokes and whatever else, and also fruit juices unless they're freshly squeezed. And I gave those up overnight. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I gave up drinking milk overnight. And lots of people ask me, how did you do that? And I sort of reflected, how did I do that? Because I tried to give all these things up before and I couldn't do it. So I just wrote a book about sort of what went on in my own head from my ability to be a master procrastinator. How did I overcome that without realizing it, So, I talked about consistency and the power of consistency and the power of having very clear vision of where you wanted to get to and reminding yourself. I talked about intentionality. I talked about improving your self-language. I talked about how to understand this process that we were actually on. What does the journey look like from unconscious incompetence through to conscious competence? And if you can anticipate where your challenges are going to be, which is going to be at conscious competence, where you're practicing good behavior, if you know that's going to be a challenge, well, what can you do around that to prevent that, to overcome or build contingencies in around the challenges that you're going to experience? So all of these kind of things, this is a stuff that was inside my head that, when I unscrambled it, this is what I went through and it worked for me. And hopefully it's worked for others.
Cold turkey or gradual?
Sorry?
What do you recommend? Cold turkey or gradual?
Now, I know...
Or is that dependent on character?
I think it depends on character.
See, I'm a cold turkey person.
I went cold turkey in the end with everything. I stopped overnight with the drinking. I stopped overnight with the smoking. I mean, I did those 3 things, those 3 big things all on the same day. I knew that the difficulties would be in the first couple of months. I knew that. So I prepared myself mentally for that. So when, that cold turkey hit me, I knew it was going to happen. So I sort of had built in alternatives, like, I started drinking ice water. With the smoking, I bought Nicorette gum. With the with the drinking, I started drinking fizzy pop and Coke, and which is why I gave that up later on. I was drinking a lot of fizzy drinks instead, but at least it wasn't beer, and now I don't drink that at all either. So yeah, cold turkey for me, but I have tried the gradual approach. And I used to find, particularly with the smoking, that I'd stop smoking. And then after 6 weeks, I'd feel really proud of myself and say, oh, you stopped smoking. So I'd go to the pub with my friends and, go to the loo. And in those days, there used to be a cigarette machine in the pub and you'd have to walk past it to go to the loo. And you think, you know what?
One.
I just deserve one. So you buy a pack of 20 to smoke one. And then you're about to throw the packet away and you think, I can't really waste this kind of money. That would be wrong. So I'll keep it. I'll give it to someone. But you never give it to somebody. You end up smoking them. And there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful.
So cold turkey for me.
Inner leadership. And you talk about inner leadership in conjunction with self-realization. Can you say something about that?
To understand inner leadership, we have to understand what leadership is. Leadership is having influence of other people, influence of circumstances. And for me, inner leadership is really understanding, how can I truly have influence over what I do? And what I mean by that is, how can I be really intentional about everything that I do? The quality of the decisions that I make, the quality of the conversations I have, the quality of the conversation I have with myself as well.
Interesting. Beautiful. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I've
you.
loved it. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. We'll have to have you back another time, I'm sure.
Oh, definitely.
And thank you so much, and namaste.
Namaste to you.